what would be your first step or tip for them to get started in real estate internationally?
Outside of the U.S., financing is not an option.
There's a misconception doing any sort of real estate deals outside the U.S. is super risky.
Land banking is simply holding your wealth in land. There are many countries where you are not allowed to, a foreigner cannot buy land. The key, from my perspective, with buying land down there is marketing. I don't know, for anybody thinking, how do I do land? Remember, there's no leverage. If you go down and find land down there, your value add is you went there and you found it.
My name's Austin Bronner. Today, I'm going to do a little interview with my co-host here, Cody Shirk, because Cody has he's done some interesting deals that I don't know that much about. So it's a good opportunity for me to kind of discover what he's been doing. Again, a venture capitalist podcast. This podcast, we launched it. These are some experiments. We're experimenting with different things. So we'd love to hear from you. But the core of this podcast, the goal of this podcast is to share our passion for adventure and business and talk about some of the things, the stories that are happening that people don't cover, going places that people won't go typically to find business deals. And Cody is an incredible example of somebody who has gone to the far reaches of the world to get involved with business deals. And today we want to talk about kind of his story and going down to Panama to buy real estate. So Cody.
I appreciate that intro.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things in hindsight. I'm like, yeah, I guess I have done that kind of stuff. But when you're doing it, I'm like, this isn't exciting or interesting. And like when you're in the grind of something, you're just like, oh God, this is a grind. This sucks. And so in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, it was some pretty cool stuff. At the time, it felt horrible. And I say that because if you're out there in the world thinking, oh, I shouldn't go on an adventure and invest, or I shouldn't go to a different country and do something, just go do it.
So set the stage. So people don't know that much about your background. Mm-hmm. So you are in Santa Monica, right? You're a firefighter. And what give us kind of, what was your mindset at that point? How old were you? Yep. What were you doing? And how did you kind of first get involved and interested in investing and buying real estate internationally?
So I don't have a financial background at all. I've gotten my MBA or whatever financial degree you want to call it in hard knocks, AKA losing a lot of money, getting robbed, getting beat up, all those things. So on one hand, it's kind of like a badge of honor I wear now. But at the time, it was kind of this, stumbling through situations that I probably, should have done a lot different, but learned so many lessons. So at the time, again, I don't have a financial background.
How old are you?
I was in my mid-20s, probably from the age of like 24 to my late 20s was like the high time when I was a firefighter. So I was a professional municipal firefighter for a major fire department. It was very serious, yes sir, no sir, paramilitary, my sideburns couldn't be lower than this. My facial hair is perfect, like literally ruler out. It was like, it was a military. And the incredible thing about being a firefighter is that you have this schedule that's pretty flexible. And what I mean by that is you can trade days with people you're working with, so you can stack your days. So I would work many days in a row. Don't recommend it, suicidal, because we were at a very busy fire station, or I was, and running lots of calls. But when you're young, dumb, you're numb to all this stuff. So
were you just so tired?
Oh, it was like, it's a different lifestyle. I can't even really explain it. It's running 20 calls a day, emergency calls, or everything from, a shooting, stabbing, cardiac arrest, car accident, fire, you name it. We did everything except for get people in trouble. So we responded to everything. Myself, I was a hazardous materials specialist and explosive tech, or that's what I was trained in. The calls we ran were mostly medical calls. So I would do that. I would be working as a firefighter for several days in a row. And then I would have 4, 5, 6, 7 days off. And when you have those days off, you're off. And one thing I miss about being a firefighter is like when you're on, you're on. That's your job.
Totally.
When you're off, like it's off. Like you can do whatever you want. You just unplug from the world. And so what I was doing, I was younger, and I grew up in a wealthy area. I did not grow up wealthy. I grew up in a trailer, so I was not wealthy at all. But I saw this wealth around me, and it's kind of this disconnect. Like, how do you make that money? And for some reason, when I was in my 20s, I was like, I got to go somewhere else to make money. Like, I'm too stupid to be competing with the people in Los Angeles or New York. Like, I got to go to a different country to make my start. So I did that.
But you were also interested in travel. It's not like, it's like, I mean, from everything you told me, like, you're really into surfing.
Yeah. So, and that's the other part. So I surfed. So I wanted to go places where I surfed, where I could surf. And one thing led to another where when I surfed, I would see these opportunities, or at least opportunities that I thought were opportunities. And that's another unique thing for anybody listening. Typically, the things that you will do best at is something you're interested in. And typically the things that you find opportunity in, others won't, because you know your expertise the best.
Totally.
And you know how to make something better or make something that somebody else will like. So for me, I like surfing. I like going to beautiful places. I like seeing real estate in these places where untouched that I knew other people would love, but nobody really knew about yet. And for me, I would, like I said, travel on my days off, and I would go to these, exotic locations. I use the word exotic, but like, don't think this is palm tree with a desert island. There's some of those vibes somewhere, but like some of these places were crazy. Like El Salvador. I was very early into El Salvador in the surfing world there.
So what year?
I say very early. There was people going decades before me, but the first time I went was in 2004, right when I got out of high school. I went by myself.
So it's still dangerous.
It was gnarly. It was super gnarly. I saw people get robbed. I had a gun pulled on me. It was gnarly. The surf is really good there, but it was like, do not bring your your unvetted travel buddy on a trip like that. You are going to get robbed before you even know what's going on. So anyway, I'm a firefighter in my professional career, then going off and doing this crazy stuff in my pastime. And so one of the places that really kept going back was Panama. And Panama is very interesting for so many reasons, which we can dive into in a little bit. But one of the reasons that I liked it was the surf is very good there. There's tons of coastline on the Caribbean and the Pacific. And believe it or not, there's a lot of surf on the Caribbean side, and there's a ton of surf on the Pacific side. But it's wild. Panama borders Costa Rica from the north, and it borders Colombia. And both those countries, for anybody listening, knows it's jungle. It's like animals, spiders, snakes, like just craziness. And for Panama specifically, the coastline, most of the coastline is very wild. It's volcanic, it's rocky, it's got trees going everywhere. It's super dramatic, incredible waves, but a lot of it is undeveloped. One, because there's not very many people there, but two, because it's hard to develop. It's very extreme. And so I would return back to Panama and again and again. And again, we can dive into more reasons or more things about Panama. But one thing I really noticed was just, how is this country on the US dollar extremely stable because of the canal, incredible coastline, great waves, and no one's really down here? Direct flight from the US, direct flights from the entire world, and no one's really doing anything here. Very strong property rights, great lawyers to work with, very cut and clear laws. Like, what's going on here? And that's one of those things where I felt like at the time I had to go and find this opportunity, and I did. But I knew that, hey, this is very unique because I was a surfer noticing this land.
In a sense, it's an unfair advantage because you know the value of surf more than other people. Absolutely.
But I could say that about a skier or a snowboarder or a hiker or somebody who makes, I don't know, baskets out of some sort of reed in some remote location in the world. There's always a specialty that everybody has, but for me, that was it for Panama. So I kept going back and forth to Panama and eventually started investing in land down there and doing deals.
How did you find your first piece of land?
Yeah, and I want to have a little disclaimer here. I don't want to sound like the gringo that went into Panama, bought all his land up, and like screwed everybody over because I didn't do it that way.
He bought up a lot of land and he screwed more people over.
Yeah, right, exactly. I will say, like, there's elements of, hey, that's just the world. Like, progress happens and stuff like that happens. That's what developing is. But I was very sensitive on the way I did it. So one of the first deals was just a simple land deal. And the reason why I thought it was interesting is because it was in front of this great wave. And in the surfing world, great waves are rare to come by. Great waves that nobody's surfing, or there's land for sale right next to it and it's beautiful in a country that works is like unheard of. Like what's going on here? And for me, this opportunity or this realization was just, I got to do this. So I did it.
So you saw it.
Yeah.
What's the process look like for somebody like buying land in Panama? I mean, I think there's a misconception that doing any sort of real estate deals outside the U.S. is super risky.
Yep.
Right. And again, I'm making that as a generalization because every country is a little bit different, but we have a very, for the most part, cut and dry, straightforward real estate process in the U.S. And you talk to most Americans and they're like, I don't really want to buy land outside because I don't know what's going to happen.
Yep.
What's the first step in Panama? What's different? What did you learn? And like how did you get started?
So it's a very important topic you brought up, which is land rights in different countries. There are many countries where you are not allowed to, a foreigner cannot buy land.
Totally.
So those countries are out the door, right? You just, you can't, if you're not allowed to do it, you're not allowed to do it. However, there are many countries where foreigners can buy land. The U.S. is one of them. If you're a foreigner, you can come buy land in the U.S. The actual property laws in terms of what's secure, what's legal, what's not, you'd be surprised. Most countries are pretty good. And if the U.S. is the gold standard, there's actually other countries that are better than the U.S., but let's just say the U.S. is the gold standard. The U.S. has many laws like eminent domain where the government can come in and take your land. They'll pay you market value for it, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Hey, we're building a freeway here. Hey, we want to put a park here. We want to put a national monument. We want to take the land over and set it on fire. Whatever. If the government wants to do it, they'll do it. So I want to make that clear that the U.S., it happens all the time in the U.S. Obviously, you always hear these horror stories in other countries, but for the most part, most countries are pretty secure.
Sure.
With purchasing land. But the big difference between U.S. or real estate in the U.S. and other countries is how it's transacted. In the U.S., it's mostly realtors and a lot of middlemen. It's kind of a frustrating process.
It's an incredibly frustrating.
Oh my gosh, it's horrible. Everyone taking a little clip of money here and there. Most other countries is lawyers. It's all law. So it's you hire a lawyer, there's a counterpart lawyer, and sometimes there's a third-party lawyer in the middle. And what these lawyers are doing is transferring property rights from the seller to the buyer. And through this process, of course, you're transferring money, but you're also making sure that the land is legit. Hey, is this registered with the government? Do we have is it surveyed? Do we know where the markers are? Do we know how this land is registered in the National Registry? Do we know that when we transfer the title from one owner to the other, like everyone's going to know about it? And when you have a law firm that you retain to do this, they do that work for you. Of course, you need to trust your lawyer, but it's very cut and clear. In Panama, specifically, this is how they do business. So you retain a lawyer, and you do everything I just explained. And the lawyers in Panama, they speak perfect English. They'll do the documents in English for you. The final documents are in Spanish because they speak Spanish there. But it's very clear. So that's how you verify, hey, is this property legit? So in most countries in Panama, land needs to be titled. If land isn't titled, it means that, hey, the land's kind of, we don't know who it belongs to. You can get land title, but that's more sophisticated. You need to get surveyors out there and you're registered with the government. But the easiest way to do this is to ensure that the land you want to purchase is titled. That means that it's already been registered with the government. They know about it. They know it's been surveyed, and somebody owns it. So for Panama, when I started out, I was only looking for titled land. I didn't want to go through that whole process of titling land. So I found that land in front of the surf break. It just happened to be titled. And
how many acres was it?
They do it by hectares, and if you're going to catch me, I think at 1 hectare is 2.5 acres, I think it is. Anyways, it was...
It's not good to do public math.
I know, horrible about public math. In fact, I think I'm wrong right now.
I have a strong rule about not doing public math.
And it's going to sound stupid because I've done these transactions and I do it in hectares. But anyways, it's in hectares. But it ended up being a little over 6 acres, or about 6 acres on the coastline. And the other interesting thing about Panama is that there's a buffer between the ocean. If you buy a coastline property, there's a buffer between the ocean and the land you can buy. And the reason why there's a buffer there is it's supposed to be public land. But if you own land with that buffer, no one's going to use it. So it ends up this land you don't own actually is part of your property. Not legally, but in practice.
In all
because somebody else
intents and purposes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I got this land, about 6 acres, in this beautiful location. And the first thing I did is just put a fence around it, but not like an obnoxious fence, just kind of like markers. And I was very sensitive to the locals in the area. I didn't want to disrupt anything. No, I don't want to disrupt who basically these people are going to be my friends or my enemies. And certainly want to make sure that they were my friends. So just made sure that, hey, I know where the property is. Hired a surveyor. They put some fence posts out there, put some markers up there, and I sat on it for a while. Fast forward a couple years later, I hired another surveyor firm to go out and subdivided it into, I think it was 3 lots. I did 3 lots, so made 6 acres into 2-acre parcels, and then sold them off. And I sold them off for, won't get into the numbers, but let's just say it was an attractive number. However, the thing I did, which I feel responsible for, I made sure the people that were purchasing it weren't going to like thrash the land. The people that purchased it actually were friends with the locals in the area. So I felt like a shepherd a little bit. I don't want to discount that I'm still a capitalist at the end of the day and made some money off of it.
Yeah.
But that whole entire process was a mind expander for me, because remember, I'm this firefighter knuckle dragger from the U.S. that doesn't know anything about business. I went to a different country, did a business transaction on real estate, ended up making money, and that was kind of my jump into realizing, hey, I can do this, and the world is a scary place, but if you're patient and check all the boxes, you can do this. And I would say that when I did this 10, 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, man, I'm dating myself, 15 years ago, the world seemed scary, and it seemed all these things that
seemed risky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about today, and I'm like, you know what? The opportunity is just as apparent today as it was then. It's just that I know more.
Yeah.
And so if you're younger or you're thinking, oh, I can't do this, you can do it. Totally doable. Go out and do it. You just got to do it.
Also, sometimes internationally, the numbers are more attractive because you're looking at 6 acres of waterfront property. Mm-hmm. Just imagine the price. This is where it can be challenging when you're, let's say, in Southern California. 6 acres on the water in Southern California, probably not going to be able to get into that.
No.
As a 20-year-old firefighter.
No, even today I wouldn't be able to do that.
It's insane, right? It's so expensive. And that's where there's some of these interesting, like, kind of arbitrage opportunities in a sense, where it's like you can go down there and get involved in something at a lower price point.
Yep.
That you wouldn't be able to do.
And I've since done transactions in many different Latin American countries, and for this podcast, we're obviously talking about Panama here. But in general, outside of the U.S., financing is not an option. I'm not saying it's not an option because it doesn't exist. It exists, but the financing is so expensive that it makes the deal impossible to do. So I've done a lot of stuff in Colombia, and in the banks there, you're looking at 15 to 20%. For a real estate loan. And that's with good collateral. Like, say you had a house. For land, you're looking even higher. And then if you're a foreigner and there's more complications, the bank's just going to keep jacking up the borrowing cost, your interest rate. So if you're looking at 20% plus to borrow money, you're like, well,
what are you doing?
What am I doing here? Yeah. This is crazy. So most of these transactions in this region of the world, and many regions of the world where financing is expensive, are cash transactions. And when you have a cash transaction, the total cost is lower. So in the U.S., we all know what happened. Interest rates went low. Housing prices took off. Well, duh, because it costs less money to borrow money, so prices are going to go up. Well, the inverse is true. You have high cost of borrowing, prices go down. In most of Latin America and many parts of the world that don't have access to cheap capital, properties are going to be lower because people are transacting in cash. So if you're an investor starting out and you go to, say you went back to Panama, Panama is more expensive since I was there, but you're still going to say, like, why is it cheaper here?
Yeah.
Why is it so much cheaper than somewhere else? Well, the big reason is because it's a cash-based real estate market. People are not leveraging themselves to get into these properties. So on one hand, that's bad because you think, oh, I got to come up with the cash. But starting out as an investor, it simplifies it even more.
Yeah.
So all the stuff I explained about how I went out and found this property and did all that, I didn't deal with a bank to get leverage. I didn't do a loan. So all that entire part of the components out of it. I just use my account.
It really removes the middleman that we're talking about.
Totally.
There's just less people involved in that.
Literally just lawyers.
Yeah.
It was just lawyers. The lawyers took care of the government part. They registered the property. All I did was talk to my lawyer, and I trusted them, and they did it. I didn't deal with the bank. I didn't deal with any of that type of stuff. The lawyers handled all of that stuff.
So as you're wiring the money, how are you feeling in that moment? Were at this point, were you completely committed, or were you still nervous?
I was nervous for sure.
Yeah.
First of all, it was basically my life savings at the time that I'm putting into a property in a different country. But I had done so much research and stuff, and I got really comfortable with the law firms. There was multiple lawyers involved. There was my lawyer, the seller's lawyer, and we hired a third-party lawyer, which handled the escrow, which is, hey, we'll hold the funds. and make sure that all the parties are straight. So I wired that money. Then the law firm took care of all the registration, all that type of stuff. And I forget the exact timeline, but it was really short. Week, 2 weeks until the paper is done.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously everything before, but from the time, hey, we agreed on a price to everything's done, it's like a week or two.
What do you look at now? So, okay, you said you've done other deals in Colombia as well. What's the difference between Colombia and Panama? Anything that you look back on being like, oh, this was good and this was easier in Panama. This is something I learned from the transaction in Colombia that'd be helpful for other people that might be thinking about investing or buying real estate in Latin America.
So for Panama specifically, and this could be replicated to any type of country that's got rural areas. My value added for Panama was that I literally was out in the jungle, off-roading, schwacking through with a machete, and found this place. And I thought, okay, well, in the future, there's going to be a road that's better developed out here. So I invested in the path of progress. I knew progress was going there and that investment would eventually pay off. A little bit of a gamble of mine, but from my knowledge of surfing and all that, in my mind, it was a certainty. So for somebody else who has a similar situation or knowledge about something that you're very confident about it, that's kind of investing in the path of progress.
Yeah.
That said, it's a patience game, right? Buy something and it'll turn into something else. So there's many parts of the world that are still rural and have unexplored opportunities, unexplored lands. I would say that's one style of investing. It's kind of similar to land banking, which we can dive into later. For Colombia specifically, it was just dirt cheap. We specifically bought in Cali, Colombia, which used to be the murder capital of the world. And I say that a little like tongue in cheek because I don't want to laugh about it being the murder capital of the world, but the reality is Cali, Colombia is freaking dangerous, very dangerous. It's gotten a lot better, but Cali, Colombia, for anybody who doesn't know about that city, it's one of the 3 largest cities in Colombia, Medellin, Bogota, and then Cali. And Cali was where the Cali cartel was from. So when the whole drug war was going on, and we all know what happened with Medellin, and everyone's watched Hell About the Drug Lords, the power was absorbed into Cali. So Cali is this city. It's big, and it's beautiful. It's got a lot of interesting things going on there.
Mountainous.
So
I haven't been there.
Medellin is in this kind of valley with big mountains. Cali is a little bit like that, a little less on the extreme elevation change, but just an hour outside of that town is incredibly beautiful. Lake country, motorbiking, dirt biking, hiking.
So you're seeing it. You're like, this is a beautiful place.
This is
and
a
it's
no-brainer.
Dirt cheap.
And it's a direct flight from the U.S.
Yeah.
It's super cheap there. The real estate cheap, but also going out to dinner. You go out to dinner with 4 friends and you eat, drink all you can, and you're looking at like a $90 bill. Like what's going on here? Yeah. Which would have been like a $400 or $500 bill in New York. Totally. So it's the cost of living and the quality of life there. It's almost like a European style of living because you have this colonial architecture, sophisticated culture, and then you got this cheap prices. You're like, there's something wrong here. This is mispriced. So that's when I got really interested in Cali, and this is about a decade or more ago. And real estate was just dirt cheap. I'm talking like dirt cheap. I'm talking apartments for like $40,000, $50,000. And this was just when Airbnb was kind of taking off, the short-term rental market. So going back to keeping the banks out of this equation, okay, quick math as a novice investor as me, still as this firefighter, just kind of picking my nose, like doing back of the napkin math. If I buy this apartment for $50,000 and I rent it out for $100 a night and I have whatever percent occupancy, I've got this amount of yield on it. And I won't do all the numbers, but let's just say I've got 20% yield on an apartment and I put $50,000 into it. That's a lot better than I'm going to find in the U.S.
For sure.
That's a lot better than I know in any other country. So again, that was very simplistic.
And also the numbers to get into it.
Totally. Like you're
100% ownership.
Yeah, I'm still in my 20s, like at a salaried job where I don't have like financial bonuses. I'm strapped. So if I'm gonna use my hard-earned money to get a return, like this looks pretty dang attractive.
Yeah.
That said, it's Colombia, the murder capital of the world, in Cali. It's terrifying. At the same time, going back to what I've
same time, you can go and eat all you want.
Yeah, but also like I did it.
Yeah.
I went and did it. And I made some great friends on the ground there that were instrumental. That's the other part about investing in foreign real estate. Always have an on-the-ground partner that you trust, basically with your life. So Colombia was another example of how you can play real estate.
So what year was this? This is post Panama, right?
Yeah, don't ask me math or year questions, but yeah, this is 2000. This is like a little later, 15-ish.
Okay. So 2015. So after the Panama, 5 years after Panama.
Kind of about the same time.
Had you already sold your property in Panama?
No, I hadn't.
Okay.
So it was tough for me to get money for the Colombia, but I was working my ass off as a firefighter, and I wasn't really spending money anywhere else. I was really all in on that and that investment region. And being in Panama used to be part of Colombia, a century ago before the U.S. came in and made the canal, and that whole colonial era popped up. So when you're in Panama, there's a lot of Colombian culture and there's a lot of talk about Colombia. So when I was in Panama, it's one thing leads to another. I was like, I got to go to Colombia and check that all out, and that's where why I went there. But backing up, just to be clear, there's two different styles of investing. The first one in Panama was, I'm an adventurous, bushwhacking guy. Found a deal. Colombia was like, this is just cheap and the numbers make sense.
It's cheap and the yield works.
Yeah. And there's great food and the people are nice and this is an incredible place.
And in a sense, there is some path of progress because you're like, I can see the future that this place is probably going to get better.
For sure. And that right about that time was when Medellin, Colombia was blowing up. That was in the very early days when all these podcasters, all the hipsters were like, oh, I'm going to Medellin to start my whatever.
It's funny. Like it's become so common, right? And I think the digital nomad, it really expanded during COVID and people are more comfortable with remote work. Back then, less comfortable.
For sure.
And back then it was like very specific hubs people were going to.
Yep.
And that was one of them.
Yeah. And there was all around the world, and Chiang Mai and Thailand.
Chiang Mai was a big one for sure.
Anywhere that's like has a really high quality life that you can, live for inexpensive on your income level. So if you're making money in US dollars and you're living in Bali, like this is great.
You're doing great.
And so Medellin was great. And my theory was Cali was like
the next one.
Yeah, the next one. And I haven't been completely right. Medellin's probably still the king of the digital nomads there, but Cali is certainly, if you're listening to this and thinking, I should go on a trip, like go.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You're going to be blown away.
Do you still own the property?
So I sold the first one I bought. I sold. To be honest with you, it became this management challenge. As the more you invest in real estate, the more you realize that if you do one property that's not a huge investment or isn't huge yield, it becomes a very difficult management problem. So you need to scale. And typically when you scale, you need more units in one location or you need a larger property. Having one small property in like one location becomes this, okay, this is a time suck for me. Now we own a 14-unit apartment building in Cali, but each apartment is big. So we have, I think, a couple of apartments are 4 bedrooms, and they're all short-term rentals. So we do it through Airbnb, and my business partner lives there full-time. He manages it. He manages a bunch of other buildings as well, and the building is beautiful. It's like really nice. Even by U.S. Western standards, you go down there and you're going to be like, wow, brand new furniture, high-speed internet, flat screen TVs, brand new. It's really nice. So we manage that building right now. We may sell that building in the future if we find a better opportunity, but that has been going well for years now.
That's awesome. And any other deals down there?
I've done lots of other land deals.
Yeah.
And I would say, again, the land in general, for anybody thinking, how do I do land? Remember, there's no leverage. Or you can, but it doesn't make sense. So using no leverage, you're going to be dealing with much lower prices down there.
Yeah.
And the key, from my perspective, with buying land down there is marketing. So if you go down and find land down there, your value add is you went there and you found it. If you can market that thing well, you can run some Instagram ads or whatever. It's a very sexy idea to buy
land.
Yeah, for sure. And that spread you can make on what you purchased it for what you can sell it for is a lot more than you think it is.
Totally.
Because
especially now, you're talking about how sexy it is. There's a lot of this. There's growing sentiment of like, get rich, get off the grid.
Yep.
Right. Oh, like, what if I had a place in Chile, a farm in Chile, off the grid that I could just raise some animals. It's less expensive than doing it. All those sorts of things.
Yeah, and whether or not
whether it's accurate
or not, it's just fun. It's an exciting thing to do. It's kind of a resume builder. Hey, part of being a venture capitalist, Yeah, you want to make money, you want to have adventure, but it's having fun too. You got to live your life. You got to enjoy your life.
It's like the overlap between something that you're interested in that lights you up and makes you happy, and business opportunities.
Yeah, and like you said, like it's not a bad idea to own land somewhere else just in case something goes wrong.
I mean, the bolt hole idea, right? The Andrew Henderson bolt hole. You want to have like the place that you live and the place that you can escape to.
Your bug out location.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got some
land banking. I want to. You brought it up. What is land banking?
Land banking, is simply said as possible, is holding your wealth in land. And the general concept is that as time goes on, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years goes on, the value of that land is going to be worth more and more, but equivalent to whatever the land is worth right now. So if I buy a piece of land for $1 right now, and we have inflation over the next 50 years, that land is probably going to be worth the same amount, inflation adjusted, as right now.
Yeah.
That's like the worst case scenario. The bull case scenario is land's finite, right? There's no more land being made in the world. We've talked about Bitcoin before, gold. Those things are also somewhat finite. And land is another example of that. So the idea of land banking is you're putting your wealth in land and you're letting it sit there because you feel more confident in the value of the future value of that land than holding, say, the US dollar or whatever else you're storing it in.
Sure.
So that's on very simple terms. Obviously, there's more complication to it, but that historically, going back hundreds, thousands of years, has actually been the way to wealth.
What's that song? Buy dirt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if we look back at, empires of the Romans or whatever, when Britain was coming up, or Spain or Portugal, it was really about who owned the land. We're the colonies. And that's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit because it is kind of boring. It's land. It's kind of this slow growth.
I mean, look at the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why are we the wealthiest country in the entire world?
It's our position and geography.
Geography, ports, incredibly fertile land.
Yeah, gold, silver,
everything.
Oil, everything.
Yeah.
We got it all. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to land. So, land banking as an investment strategy, there's lots of people do it. In fact, there's probably more people that do it than you even realize. It's just one of those super boring things that nobody really talks about.
What's your so there's really interesting, right? What you've been doing. What is your your tips?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any for someone who's listening and they're like, I'm interested in this. This has opened a door into something I haven't thought about before. What would be your first step or tip for them to get started in real estate internationally?
Yeah. So I will first say that don't be afraid to do international. But if you are terrified, I still think that U.S. land is one of the most underrated assets in the world. Yeah. Despite the run up of everything, there's still rural land in the U.S. that is cheap. So I just want to throw that out there.
There's still coastal land too. I mean, it's like West Coast up north. Mm-hmm. There's incredibly beautiful places.
Yeah. All over the place. So I just want to say that first. Internationally, it really comes down to the person. For me, it was surfing, and I like Panama. Panama's on the U.S. dollar. It's stable. Yeah. And maybe Panama's the answer for you. But depending on your genealogy, hey, I have family in Brazil. Oh, I have family in Peru or wherever around the world. It may make more sense to follow what you know. So I would say that's the first thing. What you know. Also, what activities you like to do.
Find your unfair advantage.
Yeah. And you don't want to be returning to a place and doing business in a place that you're not passionate about. Like, oh, shit, I got to go back to the mountains of whatever, Chile. Like, I hate being cold. I can make some money there, but this is a miserable experience. Like, do not do that. Do something where you want to return. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you need people on the ground that you trust. Whether that's a law firm, whether that's a land manager, or whether that's like a co-investor with you that they have skin in the game with you, you have to have that. Do not invest internationally unless you have a on-the-ground partner you trust implicitly. And then the third thing is, and this is, I will say this again and again in this podcast, don't risk more than you can afford. Never get in a situation where your entire life depends on it. So make sure whatever you're getting involved in, if the proverbial ish hit the fan, you would still be okay. And if you follow those three things, you're going to be just fine. Because at the end of the day, most of those deals work out. And once you do that first deal, it works out. It's like mind unlock. Yeah. Whoa, this is a whole new world I can get into.
Wrapping up. Would love to hear from you guys. Again, this podcast, We're experimenting here. We want to hear back from you. Subscribe. That really helps us out. And hit us up on Twitter. My name's Austin Bronner, at Abron.
At Cody
Shirk. Let us know what you think about this, and let us know what you want to hear more about.
Yeah, and any land out there that people ask questions about. I've done deals in other countries.
Yeah.
But I have done a lot of research on a lot of them, so I'd love to talk about other places. We kind of hit Latin America.
Totally.
But the world's big.
The world is big. I mean, yeah, people doing interesting deals all over. So that's it. We'll see you on the next episode.